if you look in the search function for question basket, 00 question basket. If you have any questions or if you want to share a comment, you can type it into the question basket. I get direct access to it. And I will read it out for sure in the order in which I receive it. If I don't read out a question, it could be that I somehow inadvertently skipped it, or I feel that it was already answered in a previous question, or which I will sure will not happen if it I feel is an inappropriate question. If there are any questions before, are we already live, Patrick?
No, we go live at 2:27.
Okay, excellent. So we have 5 or 4 more minutes, and we go live.
Should I check? Should I just check the PowerPoint?
Sure, go ahead, Jaya. I think you have a permission to share screen. You're a co-host.
Yeah.
Yeah, looks good.
Can you see it, Nalini?
Yes, yes, very clearly. That's perfect. Looks very exciting.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. That's good. Okay.
I'll do the same.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Whoever needs to test or check, please go ahead. Great, that looks good too. You could see that.
I'm happy to check too. Can't hurt.
Go ahead, feel free.
Do I go under advanced sharing options? It says one participant can share at a time. Oh no, there it goes. It should work. Okay.
Wow.
Good. Okay. Cool.
Excellent. So I think we can start.
Yes, we are live, but not on the page, on the landing page, but I think we can start.
Okay, I actually wanted to start with a little survey. Let's see if it works, and maybe we can use this little window of time setup. Do you see this screen? Which screen do you see right now?
The Menti screen, Melanie, we could see it.
You could see the Menti screen?
Yes, we could.
Okay, so then can we find out where all our audience is from today? If you would like to go to menti.com and use this code to tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Wannan dai akwai gaskiya da wanda duk sun dauki alhamdulillah.
So it looks like everyone who has answered is from Europe, but we have Asia. So let's see, I will share this once it's more full. But in the meantime, I would like to already welcome our wonderful panel and our guests to this very, very relevant and important panel on promoting student resilience in universities, solutions to the mental health crisis. So what we just saw during the keynote speeches was also that along with the infections, it's also the mental health crisis that's growing in the world. And during this time, it becomes more necessary than ever before to give attention to our own mental health and also the mental health of students who are our future. Because the disease in the body comes and goes, but if our minds are strong and resilient, then we have a better chance of avoiding or building our immune systems such that we don't get affected by that disease. Or at least if the disease just does come to us, we still have the resilience to go through it and come out of it in a healthy way. So what is this panel about? We have brought to you from all over the world several experts. Either they are speaking today in our panel or they are amongst our participants also ready to ask questions and contribute to the discussions. And they will bring to us tested methods, either through experience or through research, tested and found to be very, very beneficial in managing different aspects of our mental health. So as our very first speaker today, we have with us And I will share my screen once more, just one moment. We have with us Professor Jaya Dantas, and she is an associate professor. She's a Dean International of the Faculty of Health Sciences and a professor at Curtin University in Western Australia. And she kickstarts our discussion today with giving us her insights and her expertise on resilience. She has worked extensively in several African countries. She has also built up a very, very significant program within our university, especially for international students and migrant students, so that they can cope with the COVID pandemic. So over to you, Professor Dantas.
Thank you very much, Nalini. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nalini, for inviting me to this panel, and also to my other panelists for being here today. I'm going to talk in the next 10 minutes or so on international students' well-being, mental health, and resilience. I'm going to provide the West Australian context, especially during COVID-19, and reflect on some of the university, community, and government collaborations that we worked on in the last 15 months. But I'd like to start by just showing you an image of my university. This is Curtin University in Western Australia. It is the largest university in Western Australia with about 56,000 students, 4 faculties: humanities, business and law, science and engineering, and health sciences. So I belong to health sciences, and it's one of the largest health sciences allied health faculties with the School of Medicine, but it also has psychology, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, etc. And we have about 13,000 students within health sciences. But I'd like to start my presentation by acknowledgement of country that we do in Australia, where we acknowledge the Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of the land on which I present, and I pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And my commitment as a migrant into this country is to work with people from across the world, including the First Nations people. And it's at the core of the work I do, but it also reflects some of the values of my university, which are respect, honesty, and integrity. Now, in the next few slides, I'm going to take you all on a little journey across some of the countries that I worked on. I'm going to reflect on a little bit of my life in India, where I grew up, finished my master's degree, worked in a women's university, and that was my first experience with young university students in India. I worked in a department of food technology, and I was exposed to resilience that young students had. In mid-1990, I moved to Africa, and I worked in Africa for the next 10 years. So it was in Kenya that it was my first experience with the HIV pandemic that took place in the late 80s and early 90s. I worked in a school, but I learned about violence, about the HIV pandemic, and I also learned that as young people, we need to be flexible always. From Kenya, I moved to Uganda, and I embraced leadership. But it was in Uganda, where I worked for 4 years, that I learned about trauma and mental health from adversity and conflict, where people had actually experienced violent conflict over 2 decades. But it was also here that I learned the importance of mentors and mentoring and communities or in a nation that had been decimated over 2 decades. The education system was in turmoil. The health system was in turmoil. And I was at this momentous time in this country helping rebuild the education system. But it also started my experience with multiple realities, because I was in Uganda where 3 global events took place. One of them was the end of apartheid in South Africa, the HIV pandemic in Uganda, and the genocide in Rwanda. And the widespread violence against women is something also that I experienced and saw. And I grew passionate about women, young people, children, education, and health. I lived in Rwanda for over 2 years, and it was my exposure to refugees and rebuilding and resilience, because I worked with other academics and with other Rwandese who had experienced the trauma of the genocide and the adversities that they faced during that extremely brutal period. But I found that the young people also had a unique resilience that overcame their trauma. For 10 years, between 2003 and 2012, I did a lot of research work in East Timor, now also known as Timor-Leste. This was a tiny country, which is an island nation on the northern tip of Australia. And again here, I found a people who are resilient in spite of conflict, in spite of the adversities of their life. And this is one of my publications about rebuilding education and health in the post-conflict transitional nation of Timor-Leste. In Australia, I work on a number of projects with refugees and migrants, young people and women especially. And one of the things that we do is to work with participatory approaches and to work with peer mentoring. And this is something that comes up and which research is showing to be very beneficial to youth mental health or mental health in general. So currently we're undertaking a program called Empower, where we're looking at peer mentoring of refugees. And we just completed another participatory project, which was called Photo Voice, where people were given cameras to capture their lives as they resettled in Western Australia. And the power of images is captured in the form of a traveling exhibition. Now coming to COVID, what we have found is, this is just a little bit that it was, many of you all would know about this, that on 11th of March 2020, COVID-19 was declared a pandemic. On 4th of February 2020, there were only 176 cases worldwide. I just looked up the Johns Hopkins COVID outbreak situation, and there's 132 million confirmed cases as of today, 2.8 million confirmed deaths, and 192 countries confirmed with cases. One of the things that UNESCO has done is a global monitoring of educational institution closures. And I had captured this image. I couldn't find an image today, but a year ago in June 2020, where more than 1 billion learners were affected in the world, 62% of total enrolled learners, and there were 123 countrywide closures of educational institutions. And this included schools, higher education, tertiary institutions. And this was a huge impact for university students and students in general. So universities and states across Australia, we've been quite protected against the pandemic. Our government and public health authorities have come together to close our borders quite rigidly. And because we are an island nation and a smaller nation, so both our regional borders and our international borders are protected. But universities decided that they needed to come together to support both domestic and international students facing hardship. So at my university, we funded more than 4,000 students who had experienced hardship because of the lockdowns, because of social isolation, because of border closures, because of their inability to work. There was a financial hardship bursary that was made available to all students. There was an access support scholarships to offshore international students who couldn't get here. And there were telehealth services also available. But also for health sciences, this was a unique challenge because many of our students were on placements, were undertaking field work, and that had to change almost immediately. But some points of interest that I would like to talk in the Australian context, the 2016 census shows that there are about 1.5 million university students. The very nature of university experience increases risk of psychological distress. And one would say, why is that so? Because we really have university students who are those who have achieved and finished higher education and are at university. But for some students, this experience includes financial stressors, lack of sleep, poor diet, balancing work and study, responsibilities, living away from their family for the first time, and the pressure to excel. And I think this is really important in our global context, especially in the context of an increasingly competitive job market. Mental health in Australia is listed as a key component in the Sustainable Health Review agenda, especially in Western Australia. And one of the things that our government has done in recent times is to establish a national centre of excellence in youth mental health called Origin. And this has been funded. The funding is never enough, but it has been well funded in recent times. Now, I'd just like in the end to talk about a few things that we did. We had empowerment programs and personal development programs. We talked about health and well-being. But one of the things we've realized is that you have mental health across a continuum or across a spectrum, where on the lower end, it's mild psychological distress, possibly anxiety, possibly depression, to extreme cases which require hospitalization. But what we found is that students required multi-dimensional support, where there was counseling, where if they needed hospitalization, when they actually came out of hospital, there was support and living accommodation and some financial support. And in all of this, we require to increase our knowledge and our learning so that the evidence base continues to grow. It's really important to have social connections and relationships. And in this respect, the national program has commenced called Are You OK? And the Are You OK program challenges people to actually reach out to others and ask our friends, ask our colleagues, are you okay? The other thing that was really good for me was working with community organizations. And coming from an Indian from an Indian background, I worked with the Indian Society of Western Australia to support Indian students who were quite distressed during COVID. And we supported them with vouchers to buy groceries. Those who needed accommodation were allowed to do so. We applied for funding to the Office of Multicultural Interests. And here, the multi-sectoral funding helped us to have a joint approach. And this is where there was a recognition of mental health and a recognition of higher education service delivery. And there's also a need to create and support partnership. So what do we require? We require strong policies and programs. And I'd like to end by saying that university student mental health is everyone's responsibility. And we need to recognize that universities are settings for early intervention and prevention, where we can work with our academic staff, our counseling staff, our support staff, and our student guilds to provide a better environment to support student mental health. Thank you very much. I'll stop here, Nalini.
Thank you so much, Jaya. That was very, very interesting. And I was actually already very amazed with the work that Jaya has been doing. When we had our preparatory meeting with our panel before a couple of days ago, it's also very, very amazing that there is so much support at the political level in Western Australia to get these kind of programs rolling. Because of course, she has highlighted also the need for peer-to-peer support, the need for community level involvement, but that additional push from the political level helps a lot in getting these kind of programs become a priority within university environments. Thank you so much, Jaya. I would like to now go over to our next speaker, June. I hope I'm sharing the right screen. June is an associate professor of psychology and neuroscience, and also the director of positive emotion and psychopathology at the University of Colorado. It's actually amazing how much work June is doing in this space, you know, and she is doing so much also to reach out to individual students. So it's actually, I was just reading her biography, and I felt so good in the heart, in my heart, when I saw that somebody is working so closely also with dealing with issues that are very, very fundamental to resolving the mental health crisis. And one of those issues is the issue of stigma associated with mental health. And today, June is going to tell us about a very step-by-step process that she has developed to deal with these kind of issues and bring about a mental health culture in universities. Over to you, June.
Thank you so much for such a kind introduction. I'm really looking forward to sharing some of the work that my students and I have done, and just broader ideas and aims for a path forward to begin to tackle student emotional well-being, both during and beyond COVID. I'll share my slides right now and we can get going. Oh, whoops, it just stopped it. Give me 1 sec. I don't know exactly what happened there, but I'll just get it up again. 1 second. Go. All right, we'll make sure that Keynote cooperates this time around. Okay, so all right, can everyone see that okay? Excellent.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, we'll be talking today about student emotional well-being during and beyond COVID, because I think a lot of the insights and lessons that we're garnering from this really translate to a world beyond COVID as well, and kind of bring to mind the things we should be keeping in mind when we're thinking about the mental health of our young adults. Brief roadmap, as I know this is a brief talk, I just want to briefly start out by reinforcing what's been said today, which is the landscape of student mental health. Briefly touch on the impact of COVID on an already really vulnerable mental health foundation that students were encountering before COVID, and then spend most of our time today thinking in big pictures about a path forward. So if we think about student mental health, one of the things that I was always fascinated about when it came to mental health among many college-aged adults who often overlap with this developmental lifespan period we call emerging adulthood, roughly between ages 18 and 25, is that it represents what I think of as a really complex duality of both resilience and risk. So we know when it comes to resilience that many emerging adults who are also college students have a really profound time in their lives where they are experiencing a sense of growth in their sense of self, their sense of agency and autonomy. And when we think of it from a cognitive neuroscience perspective, really there's this beautiful maturation in our brain, in the way we think, in the way we, juggle information. So it's this really profound time in life where we become who we are. A lot of our developmental capacities really come online. But at the same time, there's an unprecedented amount of risk when it comes to mental health. So these were some statistics from the National Alliance for Mental Illness pre-COVID, which I used to share on our campus community to really underscore the really staggering rates of mental health challenges before COVID. For example, we saw that students would report 1 in 3 prolonged periods of depression, so feeling depressed or down for most of the day, nearly every day. Half of students were rating their mental health below average or poor, engaging in abnormally reckless behavior that could threaten their safety or that of their peers, and really having startlingly high rates of suicidal thoughts. And then, as we're in the midst of trying to tackle this mental health crisis among students, COVID hit, right? And there are a lot of popular press releases about this. This was one headline that I think summed up a lot of the concerns many of us had, which was that the coronavirus pandemic seem to literally pose a stressor on already stressed college students who are already contending with a lot, and sort of elevating rates of anxiety and depression. My colleague and I, John Rottenberg, who's a depression researcher, felt that this was a time to really call to action. What we argued in this article was flattening the mental health curve. As much as we needed to pay attention to the physical health curve and viral infection, we have another parallel wave that has been emerging and is going to continue to grow for some time, which is really the rate of serious and costly mental distress, and that we must really think about tackling this mental health curve as the next big coronavirus challenge. So with this sort of landscape of mental health vulnerability, what's a path forward? What can we begin to do? And I thought I would outline this in terms of 4 broad domains to get us thinking and talking, whether we are a parent of a student, whether we are a teacher or instructor, whether we are a student on campus. I work a lot with students conducting some of the research I'll tell you about today. I think no matter who we are and where we are, I think we can all join together and really connect with addressing student mental health during COVID. And as I mentioned, ways that we can enact lasting change beyond COVID as well. And as Nalini mentioned, one of the first things that I think is so critical is destigmatizing mental illness. We are seeing rates of mental health on the rise, and this is an opportunity for us to open conversation about normalizing the experience of whether it be depression, anxiety, substance use. In my research lab, we study severe mental illness in the kind of spectrum of bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, which often have their age of onset during the college years. This is an opportunity for all of us to really think about how we talk about mental health and to change that narrative, to use COVID as a catalyst to really change how we think about mental health. I show you this book by Steve Hinshaw, who's a professor at UC Berkeley, because it's a book I now use in my classes with students. I teach courses on mental health and mental illness, and rather than simply teach people about what mental illness is, I teach them about the history behind how we've treated people with mental illness and how we can really change our mindset and cultivate compassion. So this book, The Mark of Shame, gives a really elegant history and sort of why mental illness came to be stigmatized, and importantly begins to chart a way forward. And in this vein, I was teaching this book last fall while I was teaching, during the pandemic, teaching remotely on Zoom, and really found that this was powerful for students to know that mental illness is common and we can change the way we approach it now and beyond. One of the most important ways, I think, in addressing stigma around mental illness is changing literally how we talk about it. We've done some projects, and my students have, is destigmatizing the language we use around mental illness. So rather than labeling someone as, for example, schizophrenic, or that person is so OCD or so borderline, to really step back and think about these words and how they may be in our vernacular, and we may not even realize that they are labeling people and they are degrading them. So we've done some work in just literally thinking about the words we use around talking about mental illness. Also, in terms of changing how we talk about mental illness, is to normalize mental distress, to literally put faces and names and real human people behind the face of mental illness. And that's what I want to share with you. Just a brief project that I launched last fall in the midst of all of this, and feeling that the status quo of how we were going about addressing mental health in the field of psychology wasn't enough. So last fall, I began to conduct a series of interviews with people who are public figures for destigmatizing mental illness. Temple Grandin, a wonderful public figure for the face of autism, or Kay Jamison for bipolar disorder. In addition to a handful of scholars in our field who conduct some of the really leading science around mental illness, was to do a brief interview series with them and to put it up and make it freely available for everyone else. This is a freely available online course you can audit called #TalkMentalIllness. And what I wanted to do was to just show you a 1-minute preview of it. And just, if it's something you're interested to, feel free to share with your students or family or anyone else, with really the hope that we can begin to change how we talk about mental illness, what we know, and how we approach it. So I'll get that going. So here's a brief video, and just let me know if you have any issues with the audio, Nalini or anyone else, but I'll get it going.
I'm June Gruber, a clinical psychologist, professor, and educator at the University of Colorado Boulder, and director of this unique Talk Mental Illness series. Like so many of my colleagues, I was unprepared for the wave of mental health challenges that would face our society in 2020. From COVID-19 and the devastating economic impacts of the pandemic to racial justice protests and widespread natural disasters, our current societal moment presents unprecedented mental health concerns. For this reason, I created the Talk Mental Illness Expert Interview Series. You'll have the opportunity to hear from over 30 experts in mental health, spanning different domains in psychology and neuroscience research and practice, as well as award-winning public figures and leaders. I've curated these interviews about mental illness into 5 core themes. This Talk Mental Illness series is part of a broader educational mission to share the science of mental illness with both students and the public, both locally and globally. So if you're interested, I'm happy to send around this link. It's free to audit. You can just go on Coursera and look for Talk Mental Illness. It just launched a few weeks ago, so I'm always happy to hear people's feedback, and hopefully the interviews are of interest to people out there. I've also put the interviews up freely on YouTube as well, if you want to just go into YouTube and search for Talk Mental Illness with that hashtag in front. I think the second important piece of this is to engage students with science. So on my campus at the University of Colorado Boulder, we really felt that in order to better understand mental health of students, we needed to engage them. We needed to ask them to tell us how they're doing. So this is a study we've been started in my lab in Colorado, but we've been expanding it with the real goal of asking students to tell us how they're feeling. Because truly that's the only way we're going to begin to have a better pulse on the mental health of students on campus. And students themselves simply knowing that people are doing this research, I think, is showing them that we care and that we want to understand it and ultimately improve. So we have a project that's been ongoing, the Emerge project. We actually started it before COVID, and then unexpectedly COVID hit, and we tried to use this as an opportunity and responsibility to be tracking these students during COVID as well and beyond. So we've been now doing this over time longitudinally. We have 4 big pieces we've been trying to tackle, looking at different domains of mental health, as I mentioned, from depression and substance use, to anxiety, to psychosis, looking at things like social networks and connection, which was abruptly shifted for students and all of us, but especially during this period when social connections are so important, to have them suddenly abruptly shifted. We're looking at decision-making and also domains of happiness and emotion regulation. We've been, over the past year, expanding this internationally at a global level, but really feeling like we could do so much more. We've reached out to some of our collaborators who've administered these same remote-based surveys at different institutions in the US and Canada, as well as the UK, India, and Australia, but really feeling like we would love to expand this much further because we have a lot to learn from students all over the world. We're working on next steps, and if you're interested in supporting any of this work, our university has a webpage you can go to, and you're welcome to donate to support paying our student participants or any of the students involved in helping run this research. But I think the take-home message here is just to learn about campus mental health, you need to reach out to the students and have them tell you what they feel, and to really think of this as a universal experience students are enduring across the world. Lastly, the last couple of briefer aims are just thinking about empowering our students with science-based strategies. So there's the science of happiness, and we're so lucky we have Emma here today, who's really one of the leading experts. But I often think of this as like, these are tools and evidence-based approaches that we need to be distributing and sharing widely, because we may think as humans, we know what makes us happy, and sometimes we're right, but sometimes we're wrong, right? And I think importantly, science can begin to give us some answers. There are, a host of free courses available, and Emma has done an amazing work too of doing a lot of public outreach on this. But there's courses just as the Greater Good Science Center, for example, and there's many other courses and podcasts and just resources available that can really disseminate these strategies to the world at large. And I'll let Emma speak more, but I just want to say, I think it's really important to not only address mental health and think about disseminating treatments, but also be able to share freely our insights and what we know about the science of well-being and happiness.
June, can I request you to close?
Yeah, this is my last section. So the last is cultivating kindness. So we need to be supporting our students. We need to be, as instructors and all of us, advocating for their mental health, helping them stay connected, and being flexible when possible. So if you act as if what you do makes a difference, it certainly can and does. Thank you.
Thank you so much, June. It is indeed amazing to see that it's such a comprehensive approach that you've designed and developed, and also to see that it's research-backed. And it's nice that you've already given us a little bit of an introduction to our next speaker. And I do hope you can stay with us, June. I know you're very busy at home, because I'm sure the audience will have a lot of questions about your four-pronged approach. And also maybe our other panelists, like especially Annalise, can help you to further develop that program, because she has also designed some very practical tools that can help accomplish the 4 goals that you have. It's pretty fascinating how the panel is coming together. So, but over to Emma. I would like to introduce Emma. Emma is an amazing person. I've known her a few years now, and her dedication to mental health, whether it be for war veterans or students, is incredible. She is a lecturer and faculty director of the Women's Leadership Program at Yale University, and also the science director at Stanford's Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. Emma is going to talk to us today about why it is necessary for universities to have in-house resilience building programs, because it's perhaps not just enough, like we also saw from June, to have just one in-house psychologist that is managing the whole huge, storm of cases that are now coming on us now. So over to you, Emma.
Yeah, it's nice, wonderful to be here, and Jaya and June, so inspiring to hear you and all of the wonderful insights you've been sharing. So I got interested in mental health as a graduate student. I was at Stanford doing my PhD, and I was just enjoying being on this most amazing campus. And that first year, there were 3 suicides on the campus, and it just broke my heart. I couldn't understand, how can we be in this incredible place and yet there's so much unhappiness? And that really got me thinking and trying to figure out ways that we can improve student well-being. And as June has mentioned, as Jaya mentioned, there are some huge mental health problems that students are facing right now. And actually in the last decade, there's been a steep decline. This is pre-COVID, steep decline to the point that campuses are overwhelmed. Counselors are not meeting the needs. Psychiatric services are not able to take in everyone that needs help. It's a real crisis. And, I always think, you can't keep adding psychological services. You also need to help boost resilience. There are, of course, some mental health issues where you're going to need psychiatric services, but there may be many that can be prevented by teaching tools and strategies that can help students to help themselves. And so that's really what I've been thinking about. And the other thing as well is that a lot of times, when students are in that real high state of stress, they don't actually reach their full potential. We know from research, and June mentioned this a little bit earlier, is that when people are in a state of well-being, when they are thriving, or when they are not in a state of high anxiety, high depression, which we're seeing right now, they actually are more innovative, more creative, which is the #1 sought after trait for incoming employees, for CEOs across the world, across industries. #1 thing you want is creativity, innovation. That happens when people are in a relaxed state of mind, not when they're incredibly stressed. We know people are better decision makers when their well-being is high. They're more emotionally intelligent. They have greater leadership potential. They're better communicators. I mean, the list goes on, pretty much all of the things that we want to create success in life. And so I think communicating that message too to students and why taking care of their well-being is important, because one thing we've seen on campus, for example, at Yale, we did a number of surveys, and really we saw that students tend to not think that their well-being is important for their success. So they're less likely to do, if they learn a resilience practice, they're less likely to do it because they believe that their success sort of depends on that stress and anxiety. So that's a message also that we've been trying to sort of sort of change. So Mrinalini asked me in particular to talk about some studies that we ran with students at Yale recently. And I'm going to share my slides here and actually just jump back to some real basic science about emotion regulation. So before, as I do that, I just want to, for you to think for yourself, sort of what, what have you learned about managing your emotions growing up? What was the basic message what were you told to do with your sort of big, bad, negative emotions, right? From childhood to the workplace? Well, chances are, and this is what most people answer when we ask, you were taught to suppress, bottle it up, stuff it down. And this is what the research shows. When you do that, you actually increase the emotion. You increase the physiological impact of the emotion. For example, anger, your stress response is more activated, inflammation rises, heart rate rises, blood pressure rises, even more when you suppress. It actually has terrible outcomes, not just for our health, but for our relationships. I think we've all experienced this. When you bottle emotions up, they'll either come out at some point in a way that you don't really like, or passive aggression, or any other sort of way that it appears in your system, often psychosomatic as well. So we know that the main technique everybody uses out there, because that's kind of what we've been taught, it doesn't work. And in fact, it's terrible for us. The other technique that is widely used, and you've probably heard about this in cognitive behavioral therapy and so forth, is reappraisal, which is basically being able to see the situation from a different perspective. So taking sort of a broader perspective, a wiser perspective, a different look at what's going on, right? So you get a parking ticket, and then you tell yourself, you know what, I like this city. I'm going to consider this a donation to the city. And this way I get home faster because I got to park my car in this convenient location. That's sort of a superficial example, but looking at things from a different perspective, that works. But here I'm just going to show you really quickly the difference at the level of the brain. So when you reappraise, you see decreased activation in parts of the brain responsible for, or that are highly activated in times of stress or fear, or anger. And when you suppress, however, you actually see increased activation. So it's not just, a subjective experience. Objectively, the emotion is increasing in your system. So this is just a very unhelpful technique, though so widespread. And so this is kind of how reappraisal works. The prefrontal cortex right here, which is so highly developed in adults, and in fact, as June said, matures until the age of 25. So it actually reaches its full sort of maturation at age 25. But this helps us to sort of talk our way down. So these are the emotions centers, some of them. And thanks to your prefrontal cortex, you are able to think logically, reasonably, rationally, reappraise the situation. But here's a question. This is all fine and good, but I want you to think in your own life right now. Think of the last time you were super stressed, really angry, or highly fearful. In that moment, were you able to talk your way out of the emotion? Chances are when the emotion is really strong, it's really hard to do so. You know what's less helpful? What's less helpful is when you're really stressed and someone comes up to you and says, hey, just relax, right? That's even less helpful. So never in the history of calm down has anyone ever calmed down by being told to calm down, right? So the question is, well, what do you do then? And so we know that, under high stress conditions or really strong emotions, you get this loss of prefrontal regulation. You literally are not able to think in a level-headed way. So what then? So this is what we've looked at this a little bit in terms of breathing. Now, why breathing? I'll give you a really short anecdote here. One of my husband's friends was a Marine Corps officer, and his vehicle passed over an improvised explosive device. His vehicle blew up, and when he came to and looked down, his legs were almost completely severed below the knee, and at that moment, I mean, you can't even imagine the shock, the pain. He remembered a breathing technique. And he had learned about it in a book. What to do, wartime crisis, do this. So he started to engage in that breathing technique. And because of that, he was able to maintain the presence of mind to check on the other members of his vehicle, to give orders to call for help, and to remember and think of tourniqueting his own legs and propping them up. Later, he was told he had not done that, he would have died. He would have bled to death. And this is what breathing can do, and it's such a powerful way. Why? Because it goes right into your nervous system and calms you down. And so I'm going to share my slides here with you again, but that really triggered a lot of interest in breathing and how it can impact our well-being when our minds, when our brains are not functioning optimally because of high, strong emotion. So the classic psychological approaches are mind-driven. You know, rethink the situation, you can change how you feel. And here what we're looking at is sort of, you can think of it as a bottoms-up approach rather than a top-down. Can we calm the physiology so we can regain that ability to be level-headed and to sort of think clearly? So real quick, this is a fun study that shows why breathing is so powerful. And that's that when you're feeling different emotions, your breathing changes. So that was a study that was done. It was kind of interesting, but you've noticed this in your own life, right? When you're stressed or fearful, you're breathing more quickly. You're laughing and sobbing are other examples. But the more interesting part of this study, the one I really find so fascinating, is that when you give people instructions to breathe in the way that corresponds to the emotion, they start to feel the emotion. Do you see that? It's like a two-way street. Your emotions change your breathing, but your breathing can actually change how you feel. This is powerful because, as I was saying earlier, we sometimes don't have access to those logic, rational thinking abilities because of our emotions. Can we calm our physiology to regain access? So briefly, I ran a study with veterans with trauma. They came back from Iraq and Afghanistan with combat trauma. Many of them had been through traditional psychological services and had not seen much change. And this is actually sadly the case for many veterans with trauma, that 50% of those who actually go through treatment don't see any effect whatsoever. And so we actually engaged in we had them learn a breathing practice, which actually Annalise I'm so happy she's on our panel because she could tell us more about that. But after 1 week, compared to the control group, their anxiety was normalized. And this normalization was maintained 1 month and 1 year post, which is actually, we were kind of shocked by this because how was that possible? But somehow the breathing practice, which is called sky breath meditation, was very powerful in reducing and in fact normalizing their levels of anxiety. Many of them no longer qualified as having post-traumatic stress. And what we saw is it wasn't just them answering on a questionnaire, but physiologically their startle response, which we measured here. This is from Free the Mind, a documentary that was made about the study. We saw that physiologically, they also calmed down their breathing, slowed everything, sort of shifted on a physiological level. And then finally, this is a study we ran at Yale just recently, right before the pandemic. And we looked at so again, we were thinking, well, can we increase resilience? We know Yale students, all students, burnout rates go up, depression and anxiety goes up as the semester goes on. And so what we wanted to see, can we boost student resilience to sort of negate this effect or sort of prevent this decline in mental health over the course of a semester? And so we looked at 3 different well-being.
If you could wrap up.
Okay. Yeah, I'll wrap up. We looked at 3 different well-being interventions that are well known, empirically validated. And again, what we found was that the breathing intervention had the greatest benefit by quite a far margin. So just to show that, that approach through the physiology can be extremely helpful. And the study was actually replicated at Yale as well recently.
Thank you so much, Emma. The Yale study was actually something that we have been reading a lot here in Europe also. And I do know that I myself do this breathing technique that you taught at Yale, and I sent it to our university mental health group, and they were very amazed by it. So your study is definitely making big waves. And what I also really loved about your study, Emma, was that you developed your own in-house, I think, emotional intelligence training. And I found it so amazing that you put that up for testing as well, together with the SKY technique and the MBSR technique that's so famous, and found SKY to have amazing results. Together with, of course, the others had some result, but SKY was #1. So I think that's really amazing that you did this work, and it is such a practical tool for young students And I can definitely say from my own university life, where I suffered from extreme mental health issues, that it helped me through it. And so I would like to hand over now to Annelies. I will briefly introduce Annelies. No, Ben is next, I'm sorry. I will first, before we get to Annelies, I would like to welcome Ben. Ben is, just a minute, I will share my screen. Ben is a professor and associate dean of faculty affairs at the University of Texas A&M. So he's looking at the other side of the fence. Beyond students, what are the roles and needs of faculty if they would like to facilitate mental health and well-being of all students? So Ben has worked a lot with designing and implementing faculty well-being programs as well as faculty training programs. So his insights into what can the faculty do or how can we help the faculty help themselves and students is very valuable. So over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Natalie. And let me just start sharing my screen here. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great, thank you. First, I'm not an expert on student mental health and well-being, but I'm a faculty member, so I'm working with many students. Usually in the spring semester, I teach a small graduate course, but in the fall, I teach a large introductory ecology class. We have up to 500 students. So yeah, I've been doing that for 25 years, so I really see many of the changes in the student. And in the recent years, I've been working with Annelies and others, mostly working on some of these mindfulness and mental and meditation for faculty members. And we had quite a bit of conversation about students as well, how this influenced students. So it become, in my mind, is quite clear that if we want to help many of the students, faculty should have an important role to play. Okay, so to start, as other speakers mentioned earlier, and there's really significant mental health kind of crisis among our students. So this is a challenge. And also thinking about how we can have faculty helping a student is also a challenge, because most of the faculty member, for example, myself, I'm an ecologist. So as a scientist, I did not have any training in, say, psychological health in those domains. And so although we are at the front line interacting with students, but most of us lack training to recognize the signs of mental distress. And also we don't know when and how to refer and encourage the student to seek mental health help and care and so on. And again, this is a challenge, but also it's an opportunity, because if we can help faculty member to help students, there's quite a bit of potential here. So one of the potential solutions when you think about it would be faculty development programs, basically provide training to faculty members about how to recognize these the student in distress, and also how to appropriately refer them to the right care, right? And there on campus, there are these kind of programs. But as many of you who engage in faculty development work, it's really challenging to get faculty members to engage, to participate, because faculty members usually, they are very busy, they're in high stress themselves, there's many demands on them, and especially they are experts in certain area. When you ask them to do things that's outside their expertise area, usually is uncomfortable. So it's really a challenge. We need to think about how can we more effectively encourage faculty to participate in these programs, so they can learn about these. And as mentioned earlier, this is not only for their students, this is really good for faculty members themselves as well. But there's even a greater challenge. So if we think about beyond those students really kind of significantly in distress, as Emma and others mentioned earlier, how we really think about prevention. So in the direction to think about how we can promote mental health and well-being for all students. There's a recent U.S. National Academies report and the social science article here. They really argue that promoting student mental health requires more than a well-functioning counseling center. It's really everybody's responsibility, as Jaya mentioned earlier. And they also made a statement that institutions need to change their culture and perception from seeing their role as dealing only with the severe or acute mental health episodes to promoting the mental health and well-being of all students. Again, in this setting, faculty can and need to play an essential role in this effort because we interact with students so much. And in this challenge and opportunity, really is how we can reach our students. And as other speakers mentioned, there's many other ways by professionals, by staff, and by community and so on. Again, then what I like to ask you to think about, what's the potential role of faculty? How can we help faculty members developing understanding and skills to support the mental health and well-being of students and, by the way, themselves? So again, I'm not an expert. I really, one of my motivation coming here is to hear more potential solutions that we can use in faculty development to help faculty members to better help themselves and students. But here are a couple of thoughts. So if we think about student distress, and a good part of that is coming from their academic side of things, academic performance and all the pressures and that. So there's much we can think about, and actually there's a bit of research done on that as well. So we can use those evidence to help faculty members to develop knowledge and skills to create a first inclusive and healthy learning environment. We can help faculty members recognize many of the pedagogical approaches of their own behavior, and that has negative effect on student well-being. And how can we correct those? What are some better alternatives they can use? And there's some broader perspective of how we teach, or even what's the philosophy, how we think of our business of education as well. Really, people talk about traditionally, we think our job as faculty member as talent selection, but we see that has changed. We should see our job as talent cultivation, right? And a really important part of this to promote, help students to develop growth in a mindset. It's not whether you have you come with this or not, but it's whether you can always grow. You can developing these skills and competencies. And many of the behavioral aspects in classrooms, in how we work with students and how students interact with each other is very important. So for example, to help us understand, for faculty to understand and reduce the impact of microaggression. This is between faculty and students, two ways, and also between students. How can we recognize those and what can we do? Again, most of us don't have training. We even when we recognize, we don't know what to do. And if we have the training, we can kind of go into to help students educate them about this, and also reduce the stereotype threats. That both of those will cause is a significant factor causing distress in students in their college career. And with all those, it really is to facilitate development of the sense of belonging of all students to the university, to their profession, and to their community as well. And another really important thing that actually I've been working with Annalise and talking about the possibility of this to help faculty members develop knowledge and skills to engage and facilitate mindfulness practices for themselves and for students. So this can to influence mental well-being of faculty member, which in turn affects the climate of the learning environment, their classroom, and their interaction with students, and in turn influence the student mental well-being as well. And also, how can we maybe help faculty members developing these skills, sufficient skills, to facilitate, for example, in their classrooms, in their labs, mindfulness practices of students. For example, at the University of Texas, Austin, our former sports rival, they have a program to really teach faculty members, provide training for them, and teach them, for example, do mindfulness minutes in their class, like 3 to 5 minutes, breathing exercise and other things that can really help students. And Annalise and I we've been working together to provide Skype meditation retreats training for faculty members. We're thinking about maybe we can provide additional training about for faculty members so they are equipped and have sufficient skills to really facilitate these kind of practices in their classes. So these are just a few. There must be many others. I'm looking forward to hear from other experts, both in the panel and in our audience, about their ideas. So that's all I have. I'll turn that back to you.
Thank you, Ben, for those very, very useful insights. It's actually, I have to say, you know, to be very fair, all universities around the globe, faculty, and what you spoke about, changing the perceptions linked to mental health or promoting mental health within university campuses. All over the world, we need perception changes. But I must say that I was a student in the US about 12 years ago, or no, actually, no, it's 15 years ago. I'm much older than I think I am. And when I was in the university, because as a student, I benefited so much from these mindfulness techniques I had learned, I recommended it to the Dean of Student Affairs in my university. And there was such a positive reception. She said, yes, you know, why not? Let's do it. And then when I came to Europe, just 3 years later, I made the same recommendation to my professor in Europe. And the reaction was, oh my God, if we offer mental health programs here, we are giving out the perception that we are stressing out our people. You know, so it's, I must say that the US has done a lot already. And of course, there's much more to be done. And since now we have heard Annalise being mentioned by two of our speakers, we should go over to Annalise. I will briefly introduce Annalise. Annalise is an incredible person. She has been teaching very practical breathwork and meditation techniques for over 20 years with the Art of Living Foundation, with the International Association for Human Values. And she has brought these mindfulness and breathing techniques, which are all evidence-based, to more than 70 universities across the US. And now she's also supporting this in Europe. Recently, she has taught 2 programs for EU-wide students, and she is also a faculty at the University of Southern Maine. So today she's going to tell us a little bit about the programs she offers and what impact they have had, and also take us through a little bit of a sampler of the techniques that she teaches. Over to you, Annalise.
Thank you so much, Mrinalini. And it's amazing to be here with you, my esteemed panelists. It's been so inspiring to listen to you. I want to say first that I think it takes a village to raise a child. And I know university students are no longer children, but they're still young. And I think promoting student resilience in universities will take all of us together to do it as one big team. So I really applaud all of you for being here and having your mind on this, how we can promote resilience for students. So I'd like to talk about how we can look more and more at taking a preventative approach for students in universities so that they don't tip over into the statistics, which are having, you know, more than 63% of students in the US cite that their anxiety has been so bad that they can't function. And more than 40% of students in the US, through surveys across university students, say that their depression has been so debilitating that they haven't been able to get out of bed or do their academics. So we all know that the mental health crisis, or the mental health of students, seems to be declining more and more. And I think that calls for us to really insert preventative approaches before it even gets that bad. Like, I love what Ben is sharing about maybe even putting it into the classroom, having faculty be trained in just how to insert very small snippets of techniques that are very practical that students can use. So through my own experience, we started a program called Sky Campus Happiness. We wanted to look at well-being on a holistic level. It's the happiness and well-being of the individual. It's not just fixing a mental health problem, but making the individual thrive. And we designed this program out of Sri Sri Ravi Shankar's programs through the Art of Living Foundation. And I personally took that in 1999 when I was a college student age, but I was already into my professional dancing career. And when I learned this program and these really powerful breathing practices, sky breath meditation, I had horrible stage anxiety. Imagine I'm on the stage of the Metropolitan Opera performing 5 nights a week and feeling sick to my stomach 5 days a week because I had so much stage anxiety. And I took yoga classes, I tried all kinds of meditation, and it was only until I experienced these really powerful breathing practices that I realized you can manage your anxiety. And in fact, it can really be rooted out of your system. It can be trained out of your system if you know how to use the right techniques to calm the system and change the stress response that we all have. So what we've done through Sky Campus Happiness is we have put together a 4-pronged approach. And I feel like I'm going to be echoing a little bit of what June shared, which I loved listening to her. We find that each individual is different, and some people need more of one thing, some people need more of another thing. You can't just have a one-stop shop solution. So we put together a 4-pronged approach that are all empirically validated methods to increase well-being in students. So of course, the first one has already been mentioned a lot, which are breathing practices, evidence-based breathwork practices, and meditation. And the second approach that we incorporate in our program is something that we're all craving right now, which is social connection. And I think most of us know that aside from food and water, we are social creatures and we need social connection. It's as basic as food and water. So in our program, we put a lot of social connection and team building so that students, even if they're shy and afraid, they get that feeling of I am connected and I belong, I'm accepted, And our third approach is emotional intelligence training. We realize the intellect also has to experience well-being, and with some emotional intelligence training, we tend to become more empathetic. We understand the viewpoints of others. We tend to become more inclusive or feel more accepted, and we have more of a sense of compassion instead of anger and irritation. So we do emotional intelligence training in our program also. And the fourth element is leadership and service, or I would say service leadership. And we know through research that when we do something for others, when we reach out and take responsibility for others, or we do some sort of service, our well-being shoots up through the roof. I mean, the just one simple random act of kindness, I think I saw that in June's presentation, can change our entire perspective, our entire mood that day. So we, once we take care of students' stress levels through the breath work and meditation, we deeply encourage them and run them through exercises of how can you help others? How can you take care of someone else besides yourself? And we realize this is like the second level of boosting mental health and making students resilient, because they realize they have more capacity than just taking care of themselves and their own academics. They can also take care of others. So I want to look a little bit at also the current landscape. We all have been highly affected by the pandemic and COVID. And even before COVID, the suicidal ideation rates were increasing alarmingly, at least in the USA. Over the last 8 years, since 2012, which is interesting to note that 2012 was the onset of smartphones. Since 2012, the suicidal ideation rate in young people between 18 and 24, it almost doubled. And that was alarming in our country, in the USA, because it had never gone up that fast. So it went from 6% to 11.5% of the student population seriously contemplating suicide. That was very alarming. And I think that made most universities start paying at least a little bit more attention to mental health, because no university wants to have it in the news that their students are committing suicide. And but what happened during COVID, during the pandemic this year, was even more alarming. There was a study by the Center for Disease Control in the US across students and non-students, young people aged 18 to 24. And shockingly, the suicide rate for students seriously contemplating suicide more than doubled this past summer. The study was done in June, and 1 in 4 students, 25% of our young people, seriously were contemplating suicide. Now, to me, this sets off an emergency bell. Like, it means we have to start putting in preventative measures into university life, but we should highly consider putting them into the curriculum. Like Dr. Venn was talking about, putting it into the classroom even. So I had the great pleasure of being part of Emma's Yale study, and it was a wonderful experience to see the students go through it. And what I noticed in a couple of our high performing schools is that when we do the intake forms for these studies, we will have about 200 or 300 students, and we do an intake form, and we see on the intake form whether they've had suicidal ideation or not. And I was alarmed to see that it was always 50% of the students in my classes that had suicidal ideation. I couldn't believe it was that high. So I would interview these students after our program to see how that changed for them. And it was really beautiful to see. They would all express this after just 1 week of our program. They would say, I had given up on being happy on my campus. I just thought happiness is not possible here. You just have to be stressed, and that's how you move on this campus. But after 1 week of doing all these practices and the social connection and the support of the group, like, I actually realized I can be happy, and this is like a shock to me. So it was really beautiful to see that. And then many of our programs, we take the students through for 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And in those 6 weeks or 8 weeks, they'll say at the end, I can't believe I never thought, I didn't even come close to considering suicide once in these last 8 weeks, a whole semester, which was a new experience for them. I want to tell the story of one girl, because it warms my heart to work with students, because I get to see such wonderful stories all the time. One of our own staff members, Caitlin Sarai, she was a freshman at Ohio State University, and through her first whole year, she said she was one of the classic statistics. She had very high anxiety, a lot of depression, couldn't get out of bed in the morning most days, and so much anxiety she wouldn't be able to look people in the eye. So she was not able to have any kind of social connection. And she said she was contemplating suicide every month, sometimes every week. And we all talked about the stigma here. She wouldn't tell anyone that. And when she finally told one of her advisors, and she said, well, I thought that's normal. I thought every student does that. And they said, no, this is not normal. Like, you need to get help, and somehow she wandered into our 3-day Sky Happiness retreat. And at the end of the 3 days, she was like, I don't think I've been this happy since I was 10 years old. Like, what has happened to me? She said, so the breathing techniques for her were like a lifesaver. It changed her from contemplating suicide to feeling really happy and thriving on the campus. And after that, she became an RA the next year, and she quickly became known as the most friendly person in her dorm, which was quite a drastic change. So I feel like some students need the boost of the breathing practices to even be able to step out of their anxiety and even be able to connect to others. And I would say that the specialty of the practices we teach of sky breath meditation is that regular meditation will always relax and calm you, create some calm, but the sky breath meditation, how it uses the breath to directly impact the nervous system and to directly put you into parasympathetic mode, rest and digest. It creates emotional resilience in students and staff and faculty. It creates some kind of emotional strength where the biggest surprising result we hear from students, staff, and faculty that learn this practice is that they say, I had these stressors in life and they were stressing me out to no end. And now after learning the practice, obviously the stressors are still there, but they're like in such a weird way, I am not stressed by the stressors. They're there, I see them, and I see, okay, I have to take care of them. And to me, this is real resilience. If you can have some sort of emotional strength, because it's emotions that rule more than our intellect, as Emma showed in her presentation. The emotions rule when the emotions are high enough, the intellect goes a little to the background and the emotions rule. So if we're able to have some agency over our emotions, that creates really positive mental health outcomes, and it creates real resilience in our life. So I could talk about this stuff forever, but I wanted to give you some sort of an experience. All of you who are here, a little bit of breathing techniques. Obviously, we can't go to the depth. It takes about 3 or 4 days to learn the longer practices of sky breath meditation, but I'll just do a small breathing technique today so you can just get a taste of it. Mrinalini, we have enough time for that?
Yes, we have 5 minutes.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to take us into a practice that's called victory breath, or in Sanskrit, these practices come from the discipline of yoga. So the language of yoga is Sanskrit. Some of you may have heard of this. In Sanskrit, it's called Ujjayi breath, Ujjayi, Ujjayi. It sounds like light snoring. Okay, so all of you know how to do it, because most of you, I'm sure, know how to snore at night. So the breathing that we're going to do is a little bit of sound in the throat, and it's very important to do with the eyes closed. You'll see the relaxation response is much stronger with the eyes closed. So I'm going to make the sound for you and then teach you how to do it. So it sounds like this. Can you all hear that? Maybe it sounds a little bit like the ocean to you. Sometimes we describe it as ocean breath, or to kids, Darth Vader breath. It sounds like Darth Vader. So I'm going to ask you to do something with your mouth open, as if you're fogging a window. Have y'all fogged a window or a glass, or you've fogged your sunglasses? So I want you to make this sound with your mouth open. Can you feel the air coming from the back of the throat? Let's do it again. One more time. Good. Now with the mouth closed, same sound. And breathe in like that. And breathe out. Let's close the eyes and breathe in with that sound. And breathe out. Eyes closed and breathe in. And breathe out. Keep the sound coming in the throat, breathing in. And breathing out. And continue. Relax the body. And breathe from the back of the throat. Breathe into the whole body. A few more breaths like this with the sound, like a light snore. And with your eyes closed, let your breath return to normal. Now relax the breath. Keep the eyes closed and take a moment to observe in your body and in your mind what's happening. Notice the mind. Then let the body relax, the toes and feet and legs, knees and thighs. Hips, abdomen, and stomach. The chest, the eyes closed, take your attention to your shoulders, right arm and hand, left arm and hand, the throat and the neck, the head, the face, eyes, nose, and lips, the whole body. Feel the weight of your body. And take a moment to just notice your thoughts as they're passing through. The thoughts keep coming and going. Notice the thoughts in the mind. And just being okay with the thoughts, letting them be there. Let's take a deep breath in and breathe out. A long, deep breath in and breathe out. And slowly and gradually, when you feel ready, can gently and slowly open your eyes. Did you notice the sense of calm with that breathing that just kind of wafts over you? So this is one of the most simple and easy techniques to practice, but it immediately affects the vagus nerve. And our vagus nerve is like the lead nerve. It sends the messages to all the other nerves in the body. And when our vagal tone increases, it's associated with higher well-being, even higher immune system function when the vagal tone is increased. So these, very simple techniques, they're not just simple, they're very powerful. They can affect us, and they can also be well-being shortcuts or hacks in the middle of the day. So I think we all need to look at all these different ways we can insert really effective well-being practices into the university life for students and staff and faculty who are taking on the well-being of the students. So I really applaud again our panel for all the amazing thoughts and perspectives, and may we all bring greater well-being to university life, and may we make education become a venture into well-being and academic success. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Annalise. That was really like a wave of calm that came over. And I don't know if anybody noticed, but Annalise speaks like a scientist, just like Emma and June, and she is a ballerina by training. It's amazing. It's actually what I've read in the science is that when we do these kind of techniques that Annalise is talking about, our ability to understand and deal with very complex issues, it improves, and it becomes easier. And we can see that in action in Annalise, from ballet dancer to scientist. It's pretty fascinating. So, but we are getting a lot of very, very good questions. I will request our tech hosts to please spotlight all of the panelists, and I will start reading the questions, hopefully in the order that they were coming in. So we have I believe this is a concerned mother. Maybe, I don't know if that's, I can do it, Patrick.
Okay.
Jaya. Yeah. So we have a concerned mother who's saying that, or father, that the twins are going to go away from home and they will struggle with a lot of challenges, and what can she best do to prepare them? Whoever would like to answer can raise their hand, and I'm happy to. Yeah, Emma.
Well, I think, like we were mentioning earlier, a number of us said, giving them resilience building tools now, having them take some classes. They've learned a lot academically. What have they learned about how to take care of themselves? What have they learned about how to take care of their own mind and their own sort of well-being, their spirit? So taking classes like Annalise's, the one that we researched, or any other or additional classes that could be useful in providing tools and techniques.
Yes, indeed. That's a great idea. Thank you, Emma. Then should I go on to the next question, saying, what studies have been conducted to understand the root causes of mental health issues, such as excessive workload, assessment policies? Are all these somehow linked? And also, are there examples of centers of excellence on adjustments made to grading policies, which have resulted in a supportive environment for students? I think this is a student asking a question on very technical things or practical things that are triggers for stress. Maybe anyone who, Emma? Yeah, sure.
I don't want to hog the conversation, but we do know that stress is a trigger. Big stressors are triggers for mental health, for developing mental health issues. And some of them are inevitable, like COVID was an inevitable stress. We all went through it, but that is often a trigger. So again, giving tools to sort of help manage that on a day-to-day basis to try and prevent it from getting too high would be really useful.
Great. And then we have, actually, I think this is something Annalise should also talk about, because, as far as I have seen in my life, we will always have, if not exams, then some other triggers of stress, no? And it's very important to build that resilience, which is what this panel is about. How can we build resilience? Because we cannot control our external atmospheres all the time. We have to have internal tools that can help us deal with all of the stresses and challenges that life is inevitably going to throw at us. So it's that's again very important. That's why we are so eager to find concrete solutions to build student resilience in your student life and beyond. So it's amazing, everything. So starting with Jaya's presentation on, of course, external things have to be managed. That is so important. That's why we started with Jaya's talk, and there's so much talk also at the international level on how can we change the exam system so that it's actually supporting human development, and it's not making you go into that rote-based learning, which is so non-creative, But beyond that, since we can't change everything overnight, how can we change things within ourselves? This is very, very much needed to think about. We have another question on why. So first, this person is thanking the panelists and saying, while competition is an important aspect of improving our abilities, how can we foster a more collaborative approach to learning in universities? Maybe something for Ben.
Well, I can probably say a little bit about that. So there are much we can do as faculty members. If we think about what's the ultimate goal for student learning, what do we want them to know, to be able to do when they finish the course to walk out of university? Then that can guide us, say what's the best way to help them, right? And how to structure our learning and so on. As you mentioned earlier, if we say this semester, there's a lot of things we study. There's only 2 exams, nothing else. And by the way, it's multiple choice exams. And that's very stressful, but it's not really helpful. So by structure your class in different ways to have more meaningful learning, for example, and have a more kind of formative feedback along the way to help them learn, and also in different ways. For example, you can have a projects, right? And in your large introductory class for inquiry project is 5-week long, which is really more meaningful than a multiple choice exam. And by the way, in that process, you can also you can use a team-based learning approach to really developing the skills, social skills, and social support in that process as well. I'm not sure that directly answers your question, but that's a few things that relate to what faculty can do.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Ben. That's so important. And I think it's so nice that you are saying this, because then our faculty viewers will be inspired to change also their exam structures or evaluation structures in a way that promotes collaborative learning. And that's really, really cool. I do that always in my own classrooms, give project work that requires 2 or more people to work together. But also, we'll see in our next panel, student leaders talking. And when I was myself a student, I didn't care what the culture was in my university. I would just grab 2 or 3 friends and say, hey, let's sit and work together. So as leaders, you are student leaders. You can create that community learning and make it cool. So you can take charge of that on your own and take the first step.
I wanted to add something there, actually, because I was just meeting yesterday with the University of California, and they brought the student leaders into the meeting to look at programs. And the student leaders were saying, even though they're forced to be in a team together, that they need like team building things at the beginning of the semester to even want to work together in teams. So I just thought that was really interesting. And from a really brilliant student leader was saying this, and she was suggesting that there would be team building. Of course, she wanted meditation and team building together, but she wanted to have that in freshman orientation. She said, if we inculcate that culture of working together in teams and that it's fun, and there's always going to be competition, that's the nature of human beings, but if there's that friendliness and collaboration, even if it's competition, and if we build that into freshman orientation, or I think in India it's called induction, right? The orientations have different names in different countries, but if you can build that into the orientation in universities, it would be really brilliant, and it would encourage that collaborative learning.
That's very cool. Thank you, Annalise. Yes, team building workshops we usually think of team building workshops as something for the faculty, but for the students, that's actually quite a cool idea. I love that. That's amazing. I have one more question. I think we have time to, there's somebody's asking, who can we contact to bring mindfulness Sky courses to universities? I think maybe I'll put I can put you in touch with Annalise separately, maybe. And then one last question. So someone's giving a recommendation that cleanliness and regularly doing yoga and eating neem leaf. I think we have a person from India. It empties the stomach, and having a clear stomach helps keep the mind healthy. Thank you for that tip. That's wonderful. I would also like to acknowledge the presence actually of my mother in the audience. And the reason I would like to highlight her, although I don't know if that's usually done, but she is one of the pioneers in doing research. She was a cancer specialist, and she was one of the pioneers who started doing research on breathing techniques way back when I was a university student, and very, very resistant to learning anything to do with yoga and meditation. And she is Dr. Vinod Kochupillai. And I feel that since the question of stigma was raised in relation to mental health in the panel today, her research and the research that she got funding from the Indian government for, and also got an independent team at India's premier university to work on. She found that these kind of breathing techniques actually support our mind to go into what we call the state of flow. So what she describes as relaxed alertness. And I feel that this may be a way in which we can make the conversation on mental health cool. It's not just about managing your stress. It's not just about dealing with anxiety. But if we can deal with all those things, then we are more creative, we are more innovative, we are more supportive and contributing members of this society. And so talking about mental health, demanding that such, whether it be team building or self-management workshops, happen at university level, I think that is critically important to student success and for university success. And on that note, I will close this panel, but we have another student panel, and I would like to also say we have Dr. Gangadharan, who is the president or one of the presidents of the National Medical Commission of India, a very, very amazing person he's also a senior psychologist who will be giving a keynote talk. So please do stay. We'll take a short break to onboard our student speakers and Dr. Gangadhar. But maybe while our tech hosts are doing that, since Dr. Vinod Kochupale is here, would you like to say something? We need to unmute. We can't hear you. Can someone support? Tech hosts, can we unmute? Yeah. Please go ahead.
Yes. Okay, actually, I don't have anything to say about the university students because I haven't really worked with them. All I can say is that these breathing techniques that Annalise has talked about and which we have all experienced ourselves have been of tremendous help to just about everybody, whether they're students, whether they're adults, whether they're workers, whether they're old people, because we all go through difficult situations in our life, and we cannot really, as Mridani said earlier, we cannot change our environment. We cannot change the situations that we are made to face in our life. The only thing that can help us is to internalize ourselves and stay calm despite whatever the situation is. And to achieve that calmness of the mind, to achieve that happiness of the mind under any circumstance. As Shri Ravi Shankar says, that the only sign of success is that if you can smile even under adverse situations, then only you can call yourself successful. Not by earning money or not by having big positions. That is not a success. So to achieve that, these breathing processes that Annalise has talked about, I think are extremely important. And I, being a scientist and also a medical professional, I was very curious to know as to how they are affecting our body and the mind. So at AIMS, when I was working there, we did some research on different aspects of these breathing processes. And we found tremendous positive effects at the level of our body and the mind. The body physiology changes to a positive state in the sense that our immune system functions better, our antioxidant defenses become better. And then also at the genetic level, we found that positive changes even at the genetic level, that all the positive immunoglobulins, genes that we have, their expression improves. And all the negative genes, their expression goes down, which makes us being healthier, even even during COVID, for instance, I hardly ever wore masks and other things, but fortunately so far, I have not had any such infection. That is not to say that one should not wear mask. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that the immune system does improve by doing these breathing processes, and it helps us to prevent specifically virus infections, and also cancer. Our studies have shown that even cancer may be preventable or maybe at least delayed by doing these processes. So thank you, Mrinalini, for taking me in. But
we are losing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. And it's always, it's always a challenge for me to invite my own mother to a panel, because I feel like it's it's somehow, I don't know if it is considered something unusual to do, but her work is so earth-shattering almost. No, it was a turning point. I remember back in the day when yoga was considered something that only hoo-ha people did. She got work done, research done, which showed its practical implications. So I felt it was very nice of her to agree to come as a participant, and thank you for sharing your insights. We have a short break. Our